And John, the space is yours.
I'm just trying to catch up. That was an incredibly well choreographed presentation. Thank you. Leaves me with a couple of core questions. What is the core aim of what you're trying to achieve? And a way to put that into a frame is, what is the system you're seeking to transform?
I would say that right now, one of the things that really drove our conversations about this project was that there's not particularly good alignment between K-12 education and, in a lot of cases, college education and work. So what we're looking to try to do is to align education in a way that helps students come out with more of the kinds of skills developed that employers would like to see, and to have that in their forefront of their mind as being as important a skill to learn as would be reading, writing, and arithmetic, and any disciplinary skill that you might need to move forward in your employment industry. Am I capturing that, ladies?
Yes, and I think I just wanted to add that there's an important emphasis in our prototype on project and work-based learning in order to really learn at age appropriate or developmentally appropriate levels those skills.
So, Eileen, what I heard you say is really powerful. So can you guys essentialize? So what I saw was a lot of pieces that were incredibly valuable. I'm trying to understand how you're holding the whole. What is the core aim of this intervention that you are seeking? And what is, again, the system you're seeking to transform?
I think we're all in alignment with trying to reimagine just the way our future of work is evolving. And we're trying to address that through our educational system, from that K-5 perspective, that 6 through 12 perspective, and then the 12 through 16 perspective, and thinking about how we can drill in more of those soft skill elements that will not be replaced by AI. And trying to, enable and encourage, creative thinking, problem solving, coaching, teaching, some of these softer elements that we're seeing in the workforce. From a workforce development perspective, there are currently gaps with, just competencies with judgment or problem solving, writing reviews, self-assessment, accountability, those sorts of things. And it kind of gets lost in translation when you transition from higher ed into workforce skilling. So I think part of that, part of my need there is trying to fill that gap with, really creating an innovative workforce earlier on, as early as we can get it.
I also would say that, for right now, all of us who are trying to prepare young people to work know that we're sending them into the field of work, and we don't really know what that exactly looks like. We don't know what those jobs are going to be. And we don't know, if we don't know what hard skill sets they're going to necessarily need in terms of what industry they're working in. But we know they're going to be working with people.
So Eileen and Sarah, that's spot on, but I want to push you a little bit further. So repeatedly, what I heard you say and what I saw in your presentation were issues associated with problem solving. And it's the question that I'm still trying to get at. What's the difference between, in your approach of what education already teaches us pretty well, how to solve problems and how to manifest potential? So I think the question I'm asking is, what is the core capacity you're seeking to develop in each of these individual students that actually will manifest potential, which actually is associated with the disruption that you're trying to address in distinguishing potential from solving problems? So again, it's really the same question. I'm asking it three different ways. What is the core capacity you're seeking to develop in these students through this innovative program?
I'm going to take a stab now. Sorry for the violent language. I think that fundamentally we're trying to build resilient students who can deal with ambiguity, who are able to adapt to whatever is changing, because we know even from our own work experience that, you know, our lives have all had very different, varied career pathways, and certainly distinguishable from the generations that have preceded us. And looking ahead for our own children and the children that we're educating, it seems likely that there isn't a singular pathway, a singular discipline, a singular, you know, focus that a person may have, and that they will need to be able to continually reinvent themselves. And so in addition to being able to solve problems that the work presents, it's also about sort of being able to navigate that with the internal resilience that they may need in order to deal with whatever is the uncertainty that's going to continue to arise, certainly is arising at the present, but will probably increase just the way that the pace of technology has increased.
And honestly, education is going to change too. So what we're preparing them for, even in terms of moving from K-12 into, 12-16, that's going to also potentially look very different, especially if there's more movement with competency-based education and things of that nature. So rather than accumulating, a certain number of courses or course credit hours, students could be doing some of that, but then also having transcripts that come out that say, hey, in college, I actually learned how to do these hard skill kind of things to share with employers. So the educational environment, I think, is morphing and changing, and that resilience that we're trying to build into students that Victoria talked about so eloquently is another important component.
Yeah, we also want to say that we want the students to be more open-minded and use creative thinking along with creative learning. With all of the changes that's going on as we're seeing today, especially from K-12 to K-16, with the workforce is not like it used to be. And so what we're noticing as a team, what we've discussed, that even with us having our degrees and so forth, we've noticed that a lot of the skill set is not necessarily what's being taught, I guess, within the school system. So we're trying to find also another way for the communication to open up a little bit better for, educational side as well as the workforce as well, to try to come together and work together to get our students where they need to be so that they'll be ready for the workforce itself.
Okay, so between what Victoria, Eileen, and Belinda just said, this whole idea of resilience resonates really powerfully. But what I would ask you again, and still the same question, what is the core purpose of what it is you are trying to manifest? So I could talk, there's a framework that I could introduce, but I don't want to yet. So if you could essentialize what it is you just presented, what is the core purpose of this engagement that you seek?
A transformational framework?
Yes. Keep going. What are you seeking to transform, Belinda?
Put me on the spot. Well, we want to transfer the way our students think in a way, not just the students, it's not even just the students, it's educational, whether they're teachers, educators, leaders. We trying to change the way the leaders think and how they teach and educate our students. so that they'll be ready for the workforce.
Okay, that's, Belinda, that's great, but it's all kind of mom and apple pie stuff. What I'm trying to get you guys to do is get to the essential core. In other words, if you had 30 seconds to tell me what this whole program is really trying to achieve, how would you describe its purpose? What's at its core? What's the
Transform the
capacity?
purpose of education.
But guess what? That's what everybody's been saying for 100 years. What is distinctive about what it is you guys are seeking to transform? I want to hear in 30 seconds, what is the core purpose of what you're trying to do?
Improve education.
Great.
No?
But we can influence education to like teach people to be Nazis, right? So let's be really, really precise. So if you guys want to make this effective, all I'm trying to say is people need to understand at the most basic and core fundamental transformational level very clearly, what is it you're seeking to transform and what capacity are you seeking to build in each of these students? In order
Change their thinking skills.
Say it again.
Change their thinking skills.
I still didn't hear it. I'm sorry, Belinda.
Their thinking skills, change the way they think. No? I'm just throwing it out there. I'm trying.
No. So, Belinda, I love how you're doing this. Let's slow this down.
Okay.
Let's slow this down, right? So changing how they're thinking. Can we be more precise? What specifically is it that you're seeking to shift?
I think we're seeking to shift what is viewed as the purpose and pathway of education from its current structure to a structure that is much more, much less siloed, so that there is not like K-12, college maybe, or vocational structures that are sort of governed with separate entities with separate goals, but having a more unified structure across from education through industry. A big piece of what we talked about was that disconnect between what industry needs and what education does, and how that can work in concert with each other by having those partners always in communication, and also at simultaneously engaging what community goals would be.
Okay, so Victoria, now we're getting at it. That's what I'm trying to understand. So if you could take what you just said, what is the value of that set of integration as opposed to siloed thinking? And then what's the effect you're seeking from that value?
Well, I think the value of getting rid of the silos is that no matter what change comes, whether it's a global pandemic in the future or climate change or some other widespread problem, or simply the advent of technology, there will be a capacity for the system to flex more readily than it does at this moment, where everything is destabilized and different, what industry is doing and what education is doing and what schools are doing for young children are all sort of doing their own autonomous thing rather than actually adapting together.
Okay, so now it's starting to get a little clearer. All right, right? So you see where what I'm trying to do here, guys? Right?
Yes.
So let's get as clear as we can. What's the nodal point? What's that point? What's that place you're trying to disrupt or shift? What is the key nodal point that's going to manifest what it is you seek?
I don't want to keep throwing stuff out there.
I think
So, Belinda?
Bridging the gaps.
No, I don't want you to keep throwing stuff out. We're not talking
Okay.
about throwing darts at a dartboard here.
Right.
Slow
Right.
down.
Mm-hmm.
Based on all that incredible work I just saw,
Mm-hmm.
what is it that you guys discovered in all of this incredible work that you did to try and understand the value of this current disruption that is the nodal point for a systemic shifting that will actually manifest a resilient set of students who have built their capacity to respond effectively to changing conditions? What's the nodal point? What did you discover?
That we're really inflexible currently.
Eileen, of course we. Great. So where is it? What's the potential in understanding that restraining force? So what you're trying to activate is a whole set of students, a whole systemic culture of resiliency that is building the capacity for folks to respond to disruption in creative ways. And I don't think that's just problem solving. I think that's what got us here, is just teaching problem solving. So the restraint that you just brought to the table is currently it's not working. So what is in fact, I'll just call it the reconciling nodal point of potential. Wow, that's a big statement. What's the reconciling nodal point of potential that you've discovered in this work that you've done that actually could transform the system you're seeking to manifest?
There needs to be interactive communication between industry and systems.
So Laura, that's great. But I'm going to challenge you. What's the nature of the communication? Because just getting a bunch of people in a room and talking is probably important because it doesn't happen yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So given that you guys can design what that communication looks like, what is the nature, what's the essence of that communication that will actually seek or accomplish manifesting this resiliency and capability to respond to like really rapidly changing disruption?
Well, I think it's change management. I feel like there has to be like an embrace of change management and how to actually, take action with change and move forward with change rather than just kind of talk about it and not really doing anything with it. And I think that's where communication also ties in from a change management perspective.
Sarah, I get it, and I think you're spot on. But let's go a little deeper. What's the nature of that communication that actually will manifest effective change management?
I'm just thinking that if students are given effective tools, then they can be successful.
Say it again, Belinda, please.
If students are provided the necessary tools, it will help them to become more successful if, provide successful outcomes.
I
So
think
I'm going to challenge you on that. Only because a tool to me means that you have a screwdriver. It does one thing well, right?
Educational tools.
Still.
Okay.
Without getting into the esoteric of language, I think what I'm talking about is instruments rather than tools.
Okay.
Right? So,
yes.
Right? Because a tool does one thing really well. So I think what you're trying to do is evolve a series of instruments that can, like a piano, right? So a piano can play Beethoven's
Fifth.
okay.
sonata, or it can play like Mozart's 19th piano concerto, which are two completely different ways of dealing with various stimulus, right? So all I'm trying to get you guys to do is somehow take all of that brilliant work I just saw and consolidate it into a single powerful statement of purpose. What is it you're seeking to transform? What is the being that's necessary to do that? And what is the will that needs to be built in order for that shift to occur in a single statement?
So we want to have an educational system that is adaptive and responsive to the needs of industry as it's developing, where we have an ongoing exchange of ideas and a transactional accountability one to the other. So if we're working with industry and we say, we're going to do something, we're doing it. And if industry says that it's necessary, that they're recognizing when we're doing it and being able to hire those folks that are coming out.
Good. Good. So what's the capacity necessary for those students to effectively, resiliently respond to those changing and evolving conditions that industry is demanding? What's the core capacity you're seeking to develop in these students, regardless of whether they're at K or 16? You see what I'm trying to get at here?
Probably the idea that they have to be lifelong learners, and willing to,
Eileen, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you.
Sure.
But I've heard that so many freaking times. I'm like so bored with that. I'm sorry. So what do you truly mean by that?
that you have to know that you're going to always have to be in some form of training or readaptation or reimagining of whatever your job is. Even if you go and work in an industry and you stay in that industry for 25 years, you're not going to do the same job at year 25 that you were doing at year 1.
Good.
I think we
What's
need to
the
teach
core
people.
capacity you're seeking to develop in these students? Guys, I keep coming back to the same question.
Adaptability,
So how do you do that?
shake them up and
You have to teach people that comfort is dead. They can't rest on their laurels, right? They have to be able to embrace change. And you teach them by doing that at all different age levels by putting them in scenarios or situations where they are uncomfortable and they are challenged and they have to test their skills in different ways.
Laura, I love that, because what you just brought to the table is that disruption is of value. So what I think we're trying to unpack here, what I'm pushing you guys, I'm not going to apologize. I'm actually going to reinforce that I'm really trying to push you guys into, if in fact we are trying to develop in these students their capability to respond to constantly changing conditions, what again is the core capacity you're seeking to develop in these students, regardless of whether they're in kindergarten or at senior level in higher education? In other words, what is in fact the core purpose of this entire curriculum shift?
the ability to embrace disruption positively.
I still think it's resilience. Fundamentally being resilient in the face of adversity, whatever that adversity is, and sort of a self-confidence and self-awareness to know that they can overcome it.
So what you just did, Victoria, is what you just did is you started to dive into multiple layers underneath this kind of magical word that we call resilience. That's what I'm trying to explore. So so you started to address those core capacities. So say that again.
Okay, I'll say it again. I think it's about resilience being self-confident, self-aware.
Don't use the word resilience.
Okay, don't use resilience.
Yeah. So what's underneath resilience? What is the capacity necessary in order to respond effectively in a resilient way? Effectively.
It's resourcing, it's awareness, it's a sense of internal purpose or motivation, intrinsic motivation, as we've learned about this term.
So you've used two words there that resonated really powerfully with me. One is confidence, right? And the second one I just forgot. Boy, it was so clear a moment ago, but I'm like, my brain is going too fast here. If in fact, it's will. You said motivation, but I want to shift motivation slightly. So motivation, our educational system, as we all realize, is still based on an industrial model, right? Of developing a input output of a factory. So one can develop motivation through external media, through external forces. I think what we're talking about, though, and what Victoria, I think what you were just trying to get at is what is the internal will development of each of these folks and us as the educators. What is at the core of what it is we're trying to develop will? What's the will we're trying to develop? In other words, I can tell you what it is you're supposed to think, but how valuable is that? I think there's less than no value in that. So I think what you guys are trying to get at is, in order for the will to develop, to create the conditions necessary for the communication that Sarah was talking about a moment ago across all these disciplines, that's the question I'm asking, is what is at the core? What's the potential that you are seeking, that if you could express it incredibly eloquently in a single statement, what would that look like? What's the potential? Which is very different than problem solving. You see it?
We want to change the transactional nature of a formally industrial education system to, anyone else want to jump in?
No, keep
To
going, Laura.
a transformational model. Like, I think that it has to go from transaction to transformation.
Ah,
You know, it goes from tactical to, you know, like a transformational mindset. And that's
So
it.
That's it. That's it. So what you guys just identified is the core purpose of what you're trying to do is shift these interactions from transactional to transformational. So what's the nodal point?
John, define nodal for them.
So nodal is the place in the system that if you can touch that one point in the system, and this, by the way, this is the hardest part of regenerative thinking, in my mind, of the 7 first principles of regeneration. Nodal to me is the most challenging, because where is the one place in the system that if we can touch on that and truly affect that, it will have the largest effect on the larger system we're seeking to transform, which is why I was asking the question, what's the system you're seeking to transform? And what's the core purpose of this transformation? That will start, I think, to reveal to us where that nodal point might be. And you've touched on it. That's something to do with what I'm hearing you guys say about developing individual agency that somehow is tied to will, which is somehow tied to the individual that resides in the essence of each student. So I hope I just didn't do your work for you.
You just did, John.
Right? So, does that make sense to you guys? Am I like just talking gibberish here?
no, I mean, I think that, you know, we did have many conversations where we talked about how we wanted to get students to move from here, this is what, you know, that's all about what we're dumping on you, and more, how do you get people to be engaged and want to explore that information, want to, you know, they find their own natural curiosity. I'm interested in XYZ topic. I'm interested in, you know, like history, and not on somebody else's timetable, you know, on whatever your own developmental timetable is. And the industrial model doesn't allow for that, right? Because everybody needs to move in lockstep and everybody needs to be in the same grade and at the same level and blah, yada, yada. But if we're developing people who are able to hone in on what it is that really interests them and really catches their imagination or their passion, They're going to be people who are going to want to be involved in disruption because they're going to want to see that change. They're going to want to be somebody who is pushing at the boundaries for that. So, I would say the nodal point is, what's actually happening in the classroom and the way that classrooms are organized at the foundational level. Like, should everybody in a classroom be 5? Should everybody in a classroom, what number of students should be in a classroom, et cetera, et cetera.
So keep unpacking that because you're onto something.
So, in essence, I know that we saw some models where there were completely open learning areas, or that students had time to be in completely open learning areas in portions of their day, where they could gravitate toward experiences that were things that they were interested in. And again, they would need to be developmentally appropriate, because obviously you're not going to let, students who are 5 have the same kind of free-for-all experience that you might allow somebody who's 14 or 15 or 16 to have.
So just for a second, I would challenge that. Are you sure that's true?
In terms of what they're interested in, what they want to learn, yes. But in terms of a 5-year-old being developmentally, intellectually ready to make every decision in terms of their personal safety, or what might be a good adventure to take in the middle of a school day, I would say no. I would say that there does, for younger kids, have to be some boundary in terms of safety. But in terms of learning, can they decide what it is that they're interested in, or what excites them? Or, of course, every person can do that. You can do that from the minute you're 1.
Okay, so now we're really getting somewhere, right? So do you guys feel the energy in that?
Yes.
So what is that energy you're seeking to? So if you really look up the word education, it has nothing to do with pushing in. If you really look at the etymology of education, it's drawing from. So what is it that you're seeking? I think this is somehow related to this nodal intervention. What is it that you're seeking to draw from each of these individual students that will, in fact, well, I'm going to stop there. What is it?
Intellectual curiosity.
Oh, who said that?
I did.
All right, Laura, keep going there.
I think it's important for kids to develop intellectual curiosity so that they know that they have the capacity to explore areas that are unfamiliar to them, and the confidence to be able to tackle the tools or instruments to learn those new subject areas.
Okay, write that down.
It's being recorded.
Yeah, in industry, we compare that to push versus pull learning. Like, that push is what is bestowed upon the learners versus wanting the learners to, pull, wanting to be proactive, wanting to be, engaged and empowered, to take, the learning into their own hands. And that's where I think that's at our core, I think.
So Sarah, what you just identified is something called agency, right? Agency comes from exactly what you just said. It is not me telling you what you're supposed to care about, but helping you develop for yourself clarity around what it is you actually care about and the contribution you're seeking to make. So let me pause for a moment and say, there's only 2 rules to our conversation right now. I should have said this right up front. I'm sorry, I apologize. Rule number 1 is don't accept anything that I'm saying until you test it and say, wait a minute, does that make sense, right? Rule number 2 is also, please don't reject anything I'm saying, again, until you test it for yourself. And I think those are 2 really good rules for engaging educational circumstances and educational processes, right? So now if you could go back and take all this brilliant work you've done and all of those itemized, I will call them design components. So I've been holding a framework throughout this entire discussion, which unfairly to you, you're unaware of. And that is what I'm seeking to do is shift our level of thinking up into beliefs, philosophies, and principles, whereby what I saw you guys present was a series of concepts, strategies, and design. So all I'm trying to do is help you guys get as clear as you can on what are the beliefs, philosophies, and principles that underlie the concepts, strategies, and design you presented. Because the clearer you can get on that, the more effective you can actually be in actually identifying the nodal points that as the system evolves need to be addressed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
Yes, to see the value in that.
So let's go back then. What is the fun? So it's the same question that I started with. What is the core purpose? If you guys could state in a single sentence, a core purpose of what it is we're trying to accomplish, what's the being state or how it is that we need to approach this in order to develop the will necessary to make the transformation. So it's what, how, why, or function, being, and will. What's the purpose of this disruption or transformation that you are presenting? Look, I'm the guy who's running the educational system in Philadelphia, right? You just showed me 100 things. It wasn't quite 100, but maybe about 40 things that I could do that are strategies and design. I need to understand, wait a minute, all that stuff sounds good, but like, what am I really trying to achieve? I'm trying to get you guys to get as clear as you can on what is the core of the transformation you're seeking. And I think you can do that by proposing a purpose statement. What, how, why? And your presentation would be 1,000 times more effective if you could introduce that in a single slide and then show all the other stuff. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the three questions are functionally what it is you're trying to achieve. What's the being state or energy you're seeking to develop and regenerate throughout the process? And what is the core transformation you seek, which will develop the will for folks to actually engage that being state, because that function is going to be hard to achieve. It's not an easy question.
So what I'm going to suggest then, as you ponder this, because we are almost at the end, it's almost 7:30 and we have another team coming in 15 minutes. Do you guys want to play around? Not now, right now. Want to play around with that and then send that to me on what you think that is, and I will give it to John and we can talk about it.
Yes.
So before you challenge them with that, John, guys, do you think that this has value?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, what we're trying to do is to develop students who have the enthusiasm and the self-confidence to learn and to go in the directions that they want to go by learning to make their own choices. And that, we're going to do that by offering students more flexible, self-accountable opportunities to learn in the ways that suit them, so that we can have better district-wide, outcomes in terms of, creating students who are prepared to be good citizens and excellent workers in the coming, future economy.
Okay, so Eileen, I love that. So what you just did is you almost created a purpose statement. It's a little work, but the core to what I think you just said is imaging, the last part of that. And I think you talked about it as being good citizens. Well, again, that's mom and apple pie stuff. So one way to help ground that is to tie it to the specific place you're working. What does a good citizen look like in Philadelphia as opposed to New Orleans or Pittsburgh or Los Angeles, right? It's going to be very different. I do believe that it's place sourced. So I think that might be a key to understanding the nodal point. That's a little clue. And again, rule number 1 and rule number 2, don't accept what I'm saying. See if that makes sense to you.
I think it would be a good idea to discuss the purpose statement more as a group.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add to that is don't just focus on student. What's the shift in the adults? That becomes a critical issue. So it's a community of humans that are of all ages and all mindsets. So I think that's something you because the tendency is if you're just talking about students, you're above them, so to speak, in a hierarchy of which you're trying to avoid. And it includes everyone who's involved and including the community to one extent too, because you're nested in a community, because you identified where the community is.
Which, John, what you just did is you linked it to the last part I was talking about as being place sourced.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Remember we talked about that, nested systems.
So guys, my question to you is, would that exploration of trying to get to the essence as clearly as possible of your presentation or your aim be of value to actually manifesting the transformation you're seeking? Would that be of value?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think any good presentation, any kind of persuasive change in systems needs a clear elevator pitch, so to speak.
Good. That was fun.
Okay. Michael, I'm going to hold up on you. Maybe the next one we can, because I do want to stop at this particular point. I'm going to stop the recording right now.